Continuamos esta mañana con Ignacio Moreno y su charla Hack Your Way to Silicon Valley. Muchas gracias.
No sé si sí, se oye. They asked me to do it in English, so I'm going to switch to English. All right, super happy to be here. Actually, this is the school I come from. I graduated from aerospace engineering here. So last time I was in this room, I was doing an advanced mathematics test that I failed, by the way. So good memories from this spot. All right, today I'm going to talk about a few things, about building in Spain, building in the US, about the importance of talent density, or talent-dense communities, and then obviously how to, some tips to hack your way to San Francisco. A little bit about me. I'm an aerospace engineer, graduated from the school. I spent a long time in the software space, though. I spend my time mostly on three things. My main job, which is Capchase, it's a company I co-founded 6 years ago. Exponential, which is a community for young engineers that I'll tell you about in a little bit more. And then scouting for Andreessen Horowitz, which is a venture capital fund. They invested in OpenAI, and Stripe, and Instagram, a lot of different companies. I put small angel checks to founders, mostly here in Spain, so they can have a little bridge to San Francisco. All right, about Capchase before I start. So Capchase is the company we co-founded, three buddies and I, back in 2020. We've been operating for 6 years. It's a fintech company, so we do financial technology. In a nutshell, what we do is we help software as a service companies sell faster by providing financing in their deals. So if Salesforce wants to sell you, I don't know, $1 million deal, and you don't have the money to pay for it now, you're both stuck. So Capchase comes in, we pay Salesforce $1 million, and then you pay us back a little bit more, right? We've been operating for 6 years. We're around 80 employees all over the world, a few of them over there. And we've raised around 100 million over the course of the history of the company. And the most important thing is we've deployed around 1.5 billion to different SaaS companies around the world to help them grow faster, right? Now, all of this would have been impossible without these two really special ecosystems that I've been very fortunate to be a part of, right? The first one is the Spanish ecosystem. So I started or got into startups around 13, 14 years ago. It was 2012, 2013, while I was studying here at this school. And it was a very special time because it was mature enough that you didn't have to be crazy to join the startup world fresh out of college, right? But it was early enough that there were very few teams that were venture-backed doing interesting things. Very, very few teams. To put it into perspective, some of the most prominent VC funds today, like in Spain, like Seaya or K-Fund or Samaipata, Kibo, they were born in 2012, 2016, right? So it's around that era that the startup scene kind of starts blossoming in Spain. And that means very cool things like people that were interns when I was an intern at the first startup I joined, they now have companies with 100 employees and are making a lot of millions in revenue, right? Because the space grew very, very quickly in these last 10 years here in Spain. I was able to grow as well within a company called GeoBlink. It was a startup VC back in 2016, and I was able to experience that growth, which opened the doors to the United States, right? I was going to do my studying at Berkeley. That's when the pandemic hit, and when the pandemic hit, I got together with two of my buddies from GeoBlink, and we put together Capchase. And we did it in the US because we're kind of half there already because of our studies, and so it was a very natural transition. And our minds were blown, right? We were used to the Spanish ecosystem, which is great and growing and blossoming, but this was like a whole other world, right? The access to capital, the willingness to pay for software, the culture is very, very different. And I want to tell you a little bit why, right? Why is this, no? Or why San Francisco, why the US? Well, Capchase is New York-based, by the way, but we do a lot of things as well in San Francisco. I think the main reason is we've had maybe 1 decade to compound our software and sort of startup land. They've had 6 decades, right? The first venture capital firms started in the US in the 1960s. Sequoia, for example, which if you're in the scene, you probably know, they started in the 70s, right? So they've had 5, 6 decades to compound that. And the result of that is a super special ecosystem, right? For example, if I were to ask most of you to pull out your phones and identify which apps you have on your phone that are Spain-built, it probably wouldn't be that much of a longer list than that on the left, right? If you ask an American, maybe they have Fever. Cabify, Globo, and Idealista, probably not, right? But if you flip it around, if you come to Spain and I ask you to pull out your phones, the reality is probably like, you probably all have Uber Eats, you probably have ChatGPT, the adventurers might have Tinder, you know? So a lot of startups that were born in a very small space in the San Francisco Bay Area, right? If we talk about unicorns, it's a very similar thing, right? Software companies with $1 billion in valuation. We've had 12 in Spain since the beginning of our startup journey, of which, by the way, 3 are not unicorns anymore, probably. And in the US, there's been 125, like eBay and Vanta and many others. Except plot twist, that's not the US, that's just of the University of California, Berkeley. So the difference in the vastness of the ecosystem and the concentration of talent in a single place is huge, right? The US, by the way, probably is around closer to 1,200, so around 100 times more than in Spain right now. Okay, and why does this happen, right? So I think, this is a personal opinion, but it's been 10 years in the space, so I try to gain a few heuristics, that the answer is talent density, right? This is the picture of the Solvay conference from 1927. It has 17 Nobel laureates in that picture, and they made progress in a ton of things in the very beginning of the 20th century, right? When you put great people together, like amazing things happen. The same thing happened in the San Francisco Bay Area, right? This is the famous PayPal mafia. They were a very small team, but out of this very small team, you got people like Elon Musk, who you probably know from SpaceX and Twitter and many things. You've got Peter Thiel from early investor in Facebook, founder of Palantir, Founders Fund. You've got Reeve Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. You've got Keith Rabois, Open Door, like an insane amount of talent concentrated in a tiny team that has downstream compounding effects on the ecosystem. This one is a bit lesser known. This is the team. It was a team called General Magic. This company failed strenuously in the 90s, but their people didn't. They had such an insane amount of talent concentrated. Out of this very small team, you have the founder of Nest, you have the founder of eBay, you have the creator of Android, you have the creator of WebTV, you have Tony Fadell, the inventor of the iPod and the iPhone. So it's the kind of magic that happens when you put together like insane minds in a very tiny space. No? All right, the results, obviously, from an economic perspective, is massive. That's from scratch, US companies with more than $10 billion in market cap, US versus Europe, right? This also permeates very deeply in the culture, right? You might go to San Francisco to a bar, and you got some buddies that are coding. I'm hearing now that it's very common to see people on the street carrying their laptops because their agents are running, and they don't want them to stop running. This is some billboards here in Madrid. These are the billboards in San Francisco, right? So it's sort of a deep culture that is very embedded in the ecosystem, right? So access to capital. These are real WhatsApps from a couple of buddies that I've been talking to. On the right is Spain. For those that don't speak, they're both raising $4 million. This friend here on the left, I asked him, hey, what did it take to raise that round? Oh, just some projections till 2031. And then I was asking my buddy on the right, because I wanted to invest in this company. I asked, hey, can you give me a deck so I can see like what the company's about, whatever? His answer was like, LOL, we didn't use it, we don't have a pitch, you know? And they raised $4 million, right? Just by being able to tell their story, right? So it's just a wildly different place. Again, Spain is incredible and we're growing a ton, but there's a lot to learn from the ecosystems there. There's a lot to learn, I think, from this philosophy specifically, which is that you can just do things, right? And I think now more than ever, I'm seeing it in Spain right now, more and more companies building with global ambition instead of local ambition, right? you can build a software company that operates in the US from Spain if you want to, no? All right, so how do you get there? How can you go to, if you're a young up-and-coming engineer, how can you get to San Francisco? No? Again, you could just do things, all right? That said, there is a sort of caveat, which is that you have to earn it, no? And I think that to earn it, there is 3 key things that you could do as a young engineer to try to get yourself in a better position to go to a place like San Francisco. The first one is the obvious one, which is talent. You have to be talented. And to be talented, you don't need to be super, super smart. You need to be very passionate, and you need to work a lot. You need to be curious. But then you need these other 2 things that are lesser known, and I think they're, for better or for worse, almost as relevant, which is signal and network. So signal is kind of what makes you special to the outside, right? How have you proven that you can operate in excellence? And network is, have I made friends that can help me get where I want to go, right? Friends that maybe are a couple of years ahead of me, or that are my peers, right? So let's dig a little bit into each one of those. Okay, the first one is obvious, is talent. But the cool thing about talent is that it's really evenly distributed. Opportunities may not be, but talent is. And in the lifetime of Capchase, we've had like the pleasure of working with kids from all the amazing universities you can imagine, from MIT and from Columbia and from Harvard. And I can assure you, like, my buddy at aerospace engineering here in Carlos III was like just as bright and could do things just as well, right? But the opportunities are not, at least not as evenly distributed. And passionate people tend to be very talented. So this is a given, and I think a ton of people have it. The others are signal and network, no? So signal is really important because people take a risk when they bet on you, so you need to be able to show in a very simple way that you know what's up, okay? So what I would encourage you to do is to build in public and to contribute to open source to show that signal. This what's up here is an example from a member of the Exponential community, Marcos. He's going to San Francisco this summer to work at Vercel. And the way he did it was really simple. He went to the Vercel GitHub, he solved a few issues, and once they were merged, he was like, hey, do you happen to have some internships this summer? And they were like, yeah, for you, yeah, like, you've solved our bugs for free. So now he's going to San Francisco this summer to spend some time at Vercel. The other thing that you can do is to work for companies that are in the scene, right? So we're very, very lucky. The past 24 months have been insane here in Spain, at least from my investor lens. Things are happening that were not happening before. And now we have a ton of top-tier startups that are building for the global market from day one, many of which are San Francisco or New York-based, many of which are hiring here in Spain, Madrid and Barcelona mostly, but also remotely. These are some, like, a lot of these are YC companies, like InvoFox. We have a guy over here from InvoFox. Inbobob, Prosper, Karumi, like Supersonic, Infinite. There's a ton of amazing companies that are raising incredible rounds of capital from US investors that are headquartered there, and you can work for them from here. And that gives a huge signal when you want to go out there and land a job in SF, right? This looks like it's, I'm going backwards, sorry. All right, and then the last one is network. So network basically means to get in the scene, go to meetups, organize meetups, meet your peers. I like to put this example that I learned about recently. This is something about the network effect. Startups are born out of startups, and the truth that few people realize is that the startup ecosystem, anywhere, but in Madrid especially, is super tiny. We all know each other. And I put this slide specifically because I learned it. We had Adeyemi, the founder of 20, last week at an event, and he was telling us that he's friends from school with the founders of Job and Talent, from like his school in Marbella, not university. It's a very, very small world, and that's not a coincidence. It's not that they met at school and then, no. They knew each other, and they pull up each other, and they raised each other's aspirations, and that's how it happened, right? So it's a very small world, and you have to go out there and meet people. And the last thing I would suggest is to get on Twitter. It's like an amazing place if you follow the right people and you kind of get out there. One example, I had this guy that I really, really look up to. He sold his company for 1.2 billion a few years ago. Now he's a GP at Andreessen. I just pinged him on Twitter. I was like, hey, I have this thing that I want to talk to you about. I love what you're doing with world models. I'd love to chat. And you can get a response. He gave me a response. We jumped on a Zoom call, and we spent a little while talking about cool things happening in the scene, right? And you could do this, like, people are super open. Don't spam people, please, but like, if you go out there and add value, it works. The other thing you could do is just flatter yourself. This is the case of Mateo. Mateo was he's another member of the Exponential community. Like, he literally packs his bag 1 week to the next, see what happens, and now he's working at a Happy Robot in San Francisco, right? Like 2 weeks later. So these things can happen. All right, and that's kind of it about how are we doing with time? Good? Okay, great. Still got a little bit of stuff to go. I want to talk a little bit about Exponential, because Exponential is the community that we're trying to build to make sure that the young engineers of Spain can realize that these things can happen and can happen to them, right? I like to kind of do this visually. Like, we try to act really early on in the careers of people in the community so they can raise their aspirations and grow beyond what they think is possible, right? Exponential is, I'll tell you what it is in a second, but I want to tell you first why we started Exponential. We just want to make Spain more prosperous than it is, right? And I think that the way to do this is by making Spain a software powerhouse. It's going to be very hard to have a strong economy if you don't have a strong technology foundation, right? And to do that, you need technical founders. You need really strong technical founders. And the truth is, we have that talent density. Well, we don't need that many, right? Because this is kind of like a power law thing. If we had 10 massive software companies, those would generate 100 more, and those would generate 1,000 more, right? That's why it's called Exponential, by the way. Spain, the problem it has, I think, is two. One is that there's very few talent-dense nodes. So, for example, in the US, you have a lot of very strong universities where a lot of people concentrate, and then this compounding effects happen. In Spain, we don't have that concept, I don't think. We have great schools, but then that talent gets very fragmented, right? We don't really concentrate it that much. And the second is that for those that are very, very strong, there are not that many opportunities to kind of grow faster and compound, no? So we try to build Exponential to build up those future founders, and the way to do it is super simple. One is getting them together in one space. So we basically kind of recruit all these early, young engineers that are very strong, and try to get them in a single digital space, which is just a WhatsApp group, but also do a lot of in-real-life events so they can meet each other, get together, and so on. And the second is, for the ones that really stand out, to give them insane opportunities, like the fellowship, which I'll get to in a second, right? So yeah, in a nutshell, it's a lot about networking and giving them access to great founders that can help them in their journey. Because another thing about the startup ecosystem is really, like, people that you think are really high up and unreachable, they're super willing to help, in my experience at least. We do a lot of events, and we have that 300-person community in WhatsApp. Some of the events we've held recently, we had Pedro Claveria, the founder of Playtomic, tell us his story. We brought out to Coruña a director of product at GitHub, who was telling us his story there. We had Miguel Carranza, he's the founder of Revenue Cats, which is now a $500 million company. We had him tell us his story. He's from Sevilla, by the way, which is very cool. We had Adeyemi, who's the founder of 20, now has a $3 billion VC fund in San Francisco. We had him tell us his story as well. And then there's the fellowship. So the fellowship, what we do is we help really strong engineers go to San Francisco to work for real, right? So what we do is we get their visa. We have a partnership with the Chamber of Commerce, the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, who helps us process that J1 visa for 18 months, for a year and a half. We pay for the flights, we pay for the visa, we pay for their health insurance, and then they get US salary. So most people that are there on the fellowship are earning between $100,000 to $180,000. So they can live like comfortably in San Francisco, right? They work at cool companies, most of them YC, Y Combinator, or Andreessen backed. And the results have been great. We launched this about 18 months ago. The first fellow was landed there in November of 2024. This is them. So these are some of the ones that are there working at different companies. Again, most of them YC, Andreessen, Stanford, MIT, spun off. And then the very cool thing that I'm probably the most proud of is that they're now building their own companies, right? So, for example, Javier and Manu, they actually just a couple of months after landing there, they got into YC almost by accident, they say, and they raised a small round, and now they're building Revolt, which is started out as a sort of it started out as a restaurant agent, which they then sold, and then they pivoted to an app builder. And now I think they're kind of exploring different spaces in the enterprise space. Very cool stuff. And then Traza, which is Santi and Sergio, they also got together. And now they just raised a couple of million from a cool VC that I can't say yet in San Francisco. And yeah, living out their dream. So that's Exponential. I wanted to end with one last note that I think at least motivated me a lot when I read it. It's by Mark Andreessen. And it's about that concept that the world is a super malleable place. Like, you can probably do much more than you realize if you put the energy, put the effort, and kind of focus in the right direction. Let yourself kind of be guided by people that have done it before, you know? So, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. And if there are questions, happy to answer. I'll leave this out, by the way, if you want to apply to Exponential.
¿Alguna duda?
Regarding the fellowship of Exponential, could you elaborate more on the selection process and what is the target of people that should apply to that program?
Yeah. So it's a pretty long process, and it's very selective, but it is doable. So it's geared towards people. Well, first, let me go back one step. If this is something that resonates, you should apply to the community because a lot of the fellows are recruited from there. Okay? There is space for many things we do at Exponential because there's the community, but then we also try to help people land in cool startups here in Spain so they can kind of make the bridge, right? The fellowship itself is usually geared towards people that are already very much in the scene. They might have even gone to San Francisco like for 1 or 2 months because they've been exploring it. They've been working at a startup for a couple of years. But then we have other programs for people that are still in school, that are still studying, to help them kind of build up towards something like the fellowship. It's mostly for software engineers. There are some exceptions. But the core is that we are looking for people that are building all the time, that have their cool side projects, and their GitHub is full of contributions to all kinds of things, and that are ready to just land in SF and build.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
So we are running out of time. So any more questions?
Hi, I'm Hans. My question is, if you manage to make it to San Francisco, if you manage to enter to a cool company, a YC company, and you want to deep into the startup world, into the busy world, what would you say is the first thing you need to do? How you can build your network, and how you can like get to connect to these VCs if you came from a background where like you came to the US without knowing anyone?
Look, I think once you go, same thing by the way in the Spanish ecosystem. Like once you start, like action produces information. Once you start taking action, you start meeting people. It starts happening by itself. In San Francisco, there is already a pretty nice community of Spaniards that are there, that are going to be opening doors for you all the time. Because people, when they're expats, they want to really help each other. We try to do that as well a little bit in Exponential. So whenever either a fellow or actually anybody lands there, we have a little WhatsApp group. We just drop you in there, and all the Spaniards that are in San Francisco are there, and you can kind of meet up for coffee and start getting in the scene. That's why, by the way, working at a company like, for example, a Y Combinator company is so important, because that already by itself opens some doors via signaling, but also via network, right? Like, why did Javi get into YC? He got into YC because, like, his boss, who's the founder of the company he was working at, is a YC founder. And so when he was going to apply, he was like, hey, can you put me in touch with your partner, with your YC partner? And yeah, that really increases all your odds, right? So once you land there, you have to get out there, of course. You have to kind of build out your network, but it happens almost by itself.
Would you say there's a big advantage of working on a startup, like you said, YC, compared to maybe, I don't know, a big company like Google, Amazon in San Francisco?
Depends on what you want. I think if you want to be a founder, I think you have to go through the startup world, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And you kind of only learn it if you're in the trenches. That said, a stint at Meta or Google or whatever, it's a great signal, right? So it does help when you're raising capital, when you're kind of expanding your network. It helps. That's the truth of the matter, right? But I think before you start something, you have to kind of you have to try to be a startup first.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. And that's it.
Okay.